It was an ordinary evening in one of the most prestigious luxury restaurants in the city. Guests sipped fine wine under glittering chandeliers, and the soft murmur of polite conversation filled the air. The restaurant had an aura of elegance, a place where the rich and powerful came to dine, to relax, and to be seen. But little did anyone know, one of the most famous movie stars in the world was about to have a very different kind of dining experience. Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his roles in films like The Matrix and John Wick, entered the restaurant with his trademark low-key, humble demeanor. He wasn't looking for attention. In fact, he rarely ever was. Keanu wasn't a man who flaunted his fame, even though it followed him wherever he went. He preferred to keep a low profile and was often seen in casual clothes, blending in rather than standing out. He was a man of mystery, not just on screen, but in real life as well. Today, however, he had a particular reason for being there. Keanu had recently been involved in some personal projects that were close to his heart. After a long day of work, he decided to unwind and enjoy a quiet dinner at the restaurant he had personally invested in. It was a place he frequented from time to time, not just as a customer but as an owner, though he had chosen to remain under the radar. What the staff didn't know was that Keanu wasn't just another celebrity patron. He actually owned the place. He had a vision for the restaurant, something he wanted to contribute to beyond just writing checks. But despite his ownership, he made it a point to remain in the background, allowing the restaurant to run smoothly under its capable management, while he quietly enjoyed the meals it offered. As Keanu sat at one of the tables near the window, soaking in the luxurious ambiance of the restaurant, he felt at ease. The soft sounds of jazz music in the background, the flickering candlelight on the table, and the gentle hum of conversations made him feel like he was just another person enjoying a night out. The beauty of the restaurant, with its grand chandeliers and refined decor, gave it a timeless charm. The whole atmosphere was just what he needed, calm, peaceful, and far from the chaos of Hollywood. He took a sip of water, reflecting on the long journey that had brought him here, all the while remaining anonymous in the crowd. It wasn't long before a waiter, young, eager, but unaware of who was sitting at the table, approached. He had been working at the restaurant for a few months and was still getting used to the high-end clientele, some of whom had an air of arrogance. It was a common sight for him. The rich and famous often came with a sense of entitlement, expecting nothing less than perfection. He was proud of his job but knew that working in such a prestigious establishment came with its challenges. Some guests were more demanding than others, and it was a skill to deal with them without causing offense. Today, however, he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career, not realizing the man in front of him was someone whose presence he should have treated with more respect. The waiter approached Keanu's table with a smile. He'd seen many high-profile figures walk through the door, and Keanu didn't immediately register in his mind. There was no fanfare or red carpet for him. He was just another man sitting down to enjoy his dinner. The waiter's confidence was evident in his walk, but the moment he stood before Keanu, his words lacked the usual polish. "Good evening, sir," the waiter said, his tone professional but a bit rushed. "How may I assist you tonight?" Keanu returned the greeting with a small, polite smile as always. "Just a quiet dinner, thank you." The waiter studied him briefly, trying to gauge who he was. There was something familiar about the man's face, but he couldn't quite place it. "Are you sure you'll be comfortable here?" the waiter asked, his voice now laced with a hint of condescension. "We do have more private areas for guests like you, ones who might require a bit more attention." Keanu, slightly taken aback, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He didn't want to make a fuss. Instead, he simply replied, "I'll be fine here, thank you." But the waiter wasn't done. Still unsure of who Keanu was and believing him to be just another celebrity trying to enjoy a quiet meal, he pressed on. "We do offer a more private and exclusive experience for high-profile guests. It's just that this area might not be suited for someone of your status." His tone was now subtly dismissive. Keanu, sensing the implication and maintaining his usual calm, replied softly, "I'm sure it's fine. It was at that moment, as the waiter continued to stand before him, that Keanu's patience began to waver. The waiter had assumed something about him, something wrong. Keanu, who had spent his life learning the value of humility and kindness, now had to deal with the fact that he was being judged based on appearances. The waiter's words weren't just misguided. They were a reflection of the very attitude Keanu had spent years trying to avoid, the idea that celebrities, no matter how grounded, were somehow above everyone else. The tension in the air was palpable, but Keanu didn't let it show. Instead, he simply looked up at the waiter, his expression calm yet firm. "I'm comfortable," he said quietly. "But if you could treat every guest with kindness, no matter who they are, it would make this experience better for everyone." The AI waiter, now flustered and realizing his error, hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir," he stammered, finally catching the hint. "I didn't mean—" But before he could finish, a manager who had been watching the interaction unfold quickly stepped in. He recognized Keanu immediately and, after a brief moment of shock, apologized profusely. The waiter, now embarrassed, could only stand there as the manager quickly ushered him away. As the manager turned back to Keanu, his voice was filled with regret. "I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding, sir. We're deeply honored to have you here. Please allow me to make it right." Keanu nodded, his face softening. "No harm done," he said, offering the manager a reassuring smile. "Just remember, everyone deserves respect." And as the evening went on, the restaurant returned to its usual elegance. But for one of the waiters, the lesson learned that night would stay with him forever. Never judge a book by its cover, and always treat others with the dignity they deserve, no matter who they might be. Keanu, being the humble person he was, didn't seek any special treatment. He simply wanted a quiet meal, like any other guest. He wasn't the type of person to crave the spotlight, even though it often followed him wherever he went. For Keanu, there was something special about enjoying a meal without the frenzy of cameras or fans. He wanted peace, a break from the intensity of fame, and this restaurant, one of his favorites, provided that calm. As he sat at the table, his eyes wandered over the luxurious surroundings, the soft glow of the chandeliers, the gleaming table settings, and the well-dressed patrons around him. It was the perfect setting for a quiet dinner, a night for himself. But little did he know, the evening was about to take an unexpected turn. He glanced up as the waiter approached, offering a friendly smile, and Keanu returned it with his usual warmth. The young waiter, though polite, didn't recognize Keanu immediately. Perhaps it was because Keanu wasn't wearing his usual flashy persona. He was dressed casually, wearing a simple, slightly wrinkled gray shirt, giving him a more down-to-earth look. The waiter, thinking Keanu was just another famous face, began his usual spiel with the professionalism expected in such an establishment, but with a slight air of superiority, as though he were the one in control. "Good evening, sir. How may I help you tonight?" the waiter asked, his tone professional but a little too stiff, almost as if he were sizing up Keanu for something more than just a meal. Keanu, who wasn't used to being treated differently in places where he had no recognition, replied with a calm and friendly tone, "Just a quiet dinner, thanks." The waiter paused for a second, his gaze narrowing as he took in Keanu's unassuming appearance. There was something about him that felt familiar, yet the waiter couldn't quite place it. He was trying to figure out if this was someone important, a celebrity or a high-profile guest. Realizing that Keanu didn't seem to be a regular celebrity who frequented the restaurant, the waiter's demeanor shifted slightly. His tone became subtly more dismissive. "Are you sure you'll be comfortable here, sir?" the waiter asked. "We usually get more formal guests at this time, so I just want to make sure our setting is right for you." Keanu was momentarily taken aback, unsure of how to respond. His mind processed the words, but his face showed no sign of irritation or offense. Keanu was known for his calm and patient nature. He didn't often let things ruffle him, but this comment struck him differently. His mind churned with confusion. He had been to countless restaurants all over the world, many of them far more luxurious and far more exclusive than this one, and never once had he been made to feel out of place. He simply nodded, trying to brush off the remark. I'll be fine, Keanu replied, his voice soft and measured, not wanting to escalate the situation. But the waiter, still uncertain, continued pressing further. Perhaps he mistook Keanu's gentle response for a lack of understanding. Well, we do have more private tables for high-profile guests like you, the waiter continued, his tone still oblivious to the growing discomfort in the air. You know, people who would actually make the experience here special. But of course, I don't expect you to understand that. The words stung more than they should have. It wasn't the first time Keanu had been dismissed or underestimated because of his humble demeanor. For years, he had been used to the fact that people often judged him based on his modesty rather than his accomplishments. He didn't mind that in most settings. He wasn't one to flaunt his fame or fortune. But this time it felt different. In his own restaurant, a place he had personally invested in, helped build and cared about deeply, the casual dismissal of him felt like a slap in the face. The place he had helped create, a haven for many, was where he had always hoped to blend in as just another face in the crowd. But now that very anonymity was being questioned in a way that felt unjust. Keanu's expression didn't change, but his eyes became steely, the warmth of his usual demeanor replaced by quiet resolve. He stared at the waiter, maintaining a calm composure, yet his voice carried a quiet authority. "I'm sure it's just fine here," Keanu said, his tone quiet but firm, letting the waiter know without anger that he was perfectly content with the seating and the environment. "I'm comfortable just like this." The waiter, now realizing that his words may have overstepped, began to stumble over his next words. He hesitated for a moment, looking at Keanu in a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. He wasn't sure how to react, but Keanu's calmness seemed to diffuse his earlier bravado. Instead of apologizing immediately, the waiter seemed unsure of how to rectify the situation. In the silence, Keanu remained unshaken, his gaze unwavering. And then, as if to correct himself, the waiter quickly backpedaled, his tone softening. I apologize, sir. I didn't mean... I just thought maybe you'd be more comfortable with a more private space. Please, let me know if you need anything else." Keanu gave a small, understanding smile, not wanting to escalate the situation further. "It's all right," he said, his voice steady and kind. "Just treat everyone with respect no matter who they are." The waiter, now clearly embarrassed, nodded quickly and turned to leave. His head hung slightly in recognition of his mistake. Keanu remained seated, letting the brief awkwardness pass. In that moment, it wasn't about the error the waiter had made, it was about the lesson that had quietly been imparted. Respect for others is universal and necessary, no matter their appearance or status. And as Keanu enjoyed his quiet meal, the evening continued. But the waiter would never forget this moment, the one where he had misjudged a man only to discover that sometimes the most important people in your life are the ones who don't need to remind you who they are. But as the waiter continued to hover, the situation started to turn uncomfortable. The guests at nearby tables began to notice the tension, their conversations slowing as the uneasy atmosphere filled the room. Some of them leaned in, their curiosity piqued by the exchange unfolding at the table. It wasn't long before they noticed the sharp contrast in the energy, the calm, composed demeanor of the man at the table, and the increasingly awkward behavior of the waiter. Keanu's reputation for kindness and humility was well known, and the public had a particular fondness for the actor, who was often seen as the antithesis of Hollywood arrogance. He was someone who, despite his massive fame, lived a life of grounded simplicity. However, the waiter's actions were beginning to cross the line. The waiter's obliviousness only made things more uncomfortable. He had been working at the restaurant for a while, but he still struggled to identify some of the more low-key celebrities that came in. But even if he didn't recognize Keanu immediately, there was no excuse for the subtle but increasingly dismissive way he had been treating him. Keanu was, after all, just another guest in the restaurant. He had made it clear that he didn't want special treatment. Yet here the waiter was, attempting to force an upgrade that wasn't necessary. And with each word, the situation became more strained, like a tension building between two people with different expectations. At that moment, another staff member walked by, catching sight of the awkward interaction. A seasoned manager who had been overseeing the dining room, the employee froze when he noticed the situation. He had been busy managing several other tables, but he quickly recognized that something was off. His gaze flicked between the waiter and Keanu, sensing that there was more to this exchange than met the eye. "Excuse me, what seems to be the issue here?" the manager asked, stepping up quickly to intervene. His voice calm but laced with a sense of urgency. His eyes flickered to the waiter before returning to the guest. The waiter, completely unaware of the gravity of the situation, turned to the manager with a quick explanation. "I was just making sure the gentleman was comfortable," he said, his tone still casual, oblivious to who he was speaking to. He didn't realize he had just insulted one of the most well-known and respected actors in the world, nor the owner of the very establishment he worked for. The manager's eyes widened, and the color drained from his face as he turned his attention back to Keanu. His body stiffened as he quickly took in the situation, now recognizing the man before him. "Wait, you're Keanu Reeves?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and concern. His eyes darted between the guest at the table and the waiter, a look of realization crossing his face. Keanu, still calm and composed, nodded gently. "It's all right," he said, not wanting to escalate things further. His voice was even, not a hint of frustration or anger. "I'm comfortable, just a bit surprised by the treatment." The manager's expression shifted from concern to embarrassment as he quickly assessed the situation. He had seen the waiter approach with a confident air, but he never imagined this scenario unfolding. Keanu was not just another guest. He was a cornerstone of the restaurant itself. The manager could hardly believe that the waiter had been so clueless, unaware of the man sitting right in front of him. "Sir, I sincerely apologize," the manager stammered, his voice tinged with panic. He took a few steps closer to Keanu, now realizing the full weight of the blunder. "This is Keanu Reeves, the owner of this restaurant. I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding." The waiter's face drained of color as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He turned to Keanu, his mouth opening and closing, but no words coming out. His mind was racing, but he couldn't process what had just happened. He had just insulted the very person who owned the restaurant he worked at, and in front of other guests no less. The horror of it was almost too much for him to bear. His cheeks flushed a deep red as he tried to find the right words, but nothing came out. Keanu, always gracious and understanding, simply smiled politely. "It's all right," he reassured the young waiter, his voice gentle. "We all make mistakes. Just remember, it's important to treat everyone with kindness no matter who they are." The waiter stood there, frozen in place, his mind still trying to process the reality of the situation. He had come to work, thinking he was doing his job the best way he knew how, but in a single moment, everything had shifted. Not only had he misjudged someone, but he had done so in the worst possible way. The realization was sinking in, and the weight of his actions was starting to hit him. He had made a critical error, one that would linger in his memory long after this night. The manager, though mortified by the incident, quickly apologized once more and ushered the waiter away. "I'll take it from here," he said, trying to salvage what was left of the moment. The waiter, still processing, could only nod in agreement as he followed the manager away from Keanu's table, hoping that the incident wouldn't lead to further complications. As the evening went on, Keanu remained the picture of composure, his meal uninterrupted by the earlier chaos. The manager continued to check in, ensuring that everything was in order, and the staff went back to their duties, albeit with a new understanding of who they were serving. Keanu, for his part, didn't make a scene or demand anything beyond the typical courtesy of a guest. He remained humble, as he always did, even when the situation was far from ordinary. For the waiter, the lesson was clear. Always treat everyone with respect, no matter their appearance. You never know who they might be. And in this case, the person he had dismissed was not just a celebrity, but the very person who owned the place. It was a humbling experience, one that would stay with him for a long time, reminding him that every guest deserves respect regardless of who they are. The manager quickly tried to defuse the situation, sensing the escalating tension. He approached Keanu's table with urgency, visibly distressed by the misunderstanding. "Sir, we deeply apologize for this and we're truly honored to have you dining with us," he said, bowing slightly to show respect. His words were sincere, but there was a slight tremor in his voice, knowing the gravity of the blunder that had just occurred. Keanu, ever gracious, simply nodded in acknowledgement, his calm demeanor unwavering despite the awkwardness of the moment. "There's no need for all that," he said with a small smile, his tone still soft and inviting. His voice didn't carry anger or frustration, just an easygoing calmness that had earned him the admiration of fans and colleagues alike. "But it's important to treat people with kindness no matter who they are." The manager, though relieved that Keanu wasn't angry, still felt the sting of the incident. He was a professional, yet he was now keenly aware that they had almost lost the opportunity to provide an experience that the restaurant promised to all of its guests. The weight of the moment wasn't lost on him. Keanu's words were a lesson, not just to the waiter but to him as well. It wasn't enough to be kind when it's convenient or when someone's status is known. Kindness should be extended universally. The waiter, now completely embarrassed by the entire exchange, was still standing nearby trying to make sense of the situation. His mind was racing, and it took him a moment to gather himself before he mustered the courage to approach Keanu again. His cheeks were flushed, and his usual confidence had disappeared completely. He felt exposed and awkward, a man who had made a monumental error in judgment. His voice was shaky as he spoke, the weight of his mistake pressing on him like a heavy burden. "I am so sorry," the waiter said, his voice trembling. "I didn't realize who you were. Please, let me make it up to you. I'm really sorry for my rudeness." Keanu looked up at the waiter, his gaze steady but full of understanding. The actor's reputation was well known for his kindness and humility, and this moment only reaffirmed that. Rather than reprimanding the waiter or escalating the situation, Keanu met his apology with compassion. His eyes softened, and he allowed a small smile to cross his face as he spoke. "It's all right," Keanu said, his voice warm, offering a sense of comfort to the young man. He could see the embarrassment in the waiter's eyes, the genuine regret. Keanu knew that the mistake wasn't intentional. People made mistakes, and they had moments where they acted impulsively or without full knowledge. This was one of those times, but the waiter's humility in admitting his error was all that mattered in that moment. "Just remember, we all have our moments," Keanu added gently, his tone kind and reassuring. The waiter's face softened as he absorbed Keanu's words. The weight on his shoulders seemed to lighten, and the tension in his body began to ease. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking in the grace and generosity that Keanu had shown him. Keanu's calm demeanor, despite the disrespect he had just faced, was a powerful lesson in how to handle difficult situations with grace. There was no need for confrontation, no need for harsh words. Sometimes a simple gesture of kindness, even in the face of an awkward moment, was all that was needed to mend a situation. Keanu's words rang in the waiter's mind. We all have our moments. It was a reminder that no one was perfect, not even the most celebrated people in the world. In fact, it was because of his own imperfection that Keanu could show such understanding and compassion. The waiter felt a renewed sense of humility, not just because of the celebrity in front of him, but because he now understood that his actions, whether in public or private, had an impact on those around him. Keanu had unknowingly set an example, not only for how to handle mistakes but for how to move forward with dignity and grace. "I'll make sure to treat every guest with the utmost respect from now on," the waiter said, his voice steadier, more sincere. He was truly humbled by the experience. He had been working at the restaurant for some time, but never had he encountered a situation like this. In his eagerness to do his job right, he had misunderstood the very person he was supposed to serve. Now his perspective had changed. He realized that respect and kindness were universal, and they applied to everyone regardless of their status or background. Keanu nodded, acknowledging the waiter's sincere apology. "That's all we can do," he said with a smile. "Learn and grow." His words were simple yet profound, a reflection of his own life philosophy. Keanu wasn't concerned with holding grudges or making the situation worse. Instead, he believed in moving forward with compassion and understanding. As the waiter walked away, a sense of calm returned to the restaurant. The other guests, who had been watching the exchange from afar, returned to their conversations. But there was a newfound respect in the air. Keanu's quiet grace had not only diffused an awkward situation, but had turned it into a moment of growth for everyone involved. The manager, too, had learned something valuable. That leadership wasn't just about managing operations or making profits. It was about guiding people with kindness and setting the example for others to follow. As the evening progressed, Keanu continued his meal, enjoying the peace he had sought when he walked into the restaurant. The incident was behind him, but the lessons it imparted would resonate for a long time. The waiter, now more aware of the importance of treating others with dignity, approached each guest with renewed respect and care. And the manager, who had witnessed Keanu's grace firsthand, made a mental note to remind his team that kindness, above all, was the restaurant's true hallmark. In a world where misunderstandings are common, sometimes the simplest moments, like a quiet apology and a few kind words, can make all the difference. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed completely. What had started as an uncomfortable and tense encounter between a humble movie star and an unaware waiter had transformed into something far more meaningful. The energy in the room had shifted, not just for Keanu but for everyone who had witnessed the exchange. The guests who had overheard the incident were now filled with a sense of respect, as though they had witnessed a moment of true humanity, a reminder that kindness and understanding are sometimes more powerful than anything else. Keanu had remained calm and dignified throughout the ordeal, showing that even when people make mistakes, there is always an opportunity for understanding and growth. He had not once raised his voice or reacted harshly to the situation. Instead, he had chosen to meet the waiter's rudeness with patience and compassion. His quiet strength had diffused the tension in the room and, in doing so, had allowed the moment to become a lesson for everyone present. It was a powerful reminder that we are all fallible, but that does not mean we cannot learn and do better. As the evening drew to a close, the manager took a moment to personally thank Keanu for his patience and kindness. The manager, who had witnessed the entire exchange, was deeply moved by how Keanu handled the situation. He had been worried about the repercussions of the waiter's mistake and the possible negative impact on the restaurant's reputation, but Keanu had handled everything with such grace that no one would have known there had even been a problem. The manager, who had worked in the hospitality industry for years, realized that the real mark of leadership wasn't in making customers happy only when things were going right. It was in handling mistakes with humility and care. He approached Keanu, offering a heartfelt apology once more for the incident, but also expressing his gratitude for the example Keanu had set. "Thank you again for your understanding, sir," the manager said, bowing slightly. "You've not only helped the situation, but you've also shown us the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, no matter who they are." Keanu, ever humble, simply smiled and nodded. "No problem," he said, his voice calm and sincere. "We all have our moments. It's how we handle them that counts." The waiter, who had been lingering in the background, his face still flushed with embarrassment, approached Keanu one more time. His body language was visibly tense, but he had a look of deep remorse on his face. He had spent the rest of the evening reflecting on his actions, and now, with the weight of the lesson heavy on him, he felt compelled to apologize once again. "I'm truly sorry for how I acted earlier," the waiter said, his voice trembling slightly. "I didn't realize who you were, and I was rude. I really appreciate your understanding, and I'll make sure to treat every guest with the respect they deserve from now on." Keanu looked up at the waiter, his expression softening. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet understanding. "It's all right," he said gently. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them and move forward." The waiter nodded, his face brightening slightly at Keanu's forgiveness. He had been humbled by the experience and, more than anything, had gained an invaluable lesson in respect and humility. He understood now that the most important people, You meet in life are often the ones who don't seek attention or recognition. They are the ones who lead by example through simple acts of kindness. And in this case, that person was Keanu Reeves. Not just a famous actor, but a humble man who owned the very restaurant where he had dined. As Keanu stood up to leave the restaurant, he did so quietly, without the need for any grand gestures or attention. There were no photographers, no fans rushing to get a glimpse of him. Keanu wasn't the type to flaunt his fame. He didn't need to announce his presence to the world. He left the restaurant with the same humility he had walked in with, content in knowing that his small act of grace had made a lasting impact on those around him. Sometimes, the greatest acts of kindness happen not through grand gestures or publicity, but through simple understanding and genuine empathy. It was a lesson that the waiter would carry with him forever, that sometimes the most important people in your life are the ones who don't need to remind you who they are. They are the ones who, through their actions and words, teach you the most valuable lessons of all. As Keanu disappeared into the night, the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. But the lesson of the evening remained. The manager, the staff, and even the guests who had witnessed the encounter were all reminded that respect, humility, and kindness should never be taken for granted. In the end, it wasn't about who owned the restaurant or who was sitting at the table. It was about the quiet power of understanding and the realization that sometimes the most profound lessons in life come from the simplest interactions.